I thought I was just the help at that fancy engagement party. But when she slapped me in front of everyone, calling me worthless, she had no idea who I really was. What happened next? Let me tell you how one slap destroyed her perfect life forever. Before I tell you this incredible story of karma and revenge, smash that like button if you believe everyone gets what they deserve, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping true stories. You know, people look at me and they see exactly what they want to see. A simple black woman in her 30s working catering jobs, probably struggling to make ends meet. And honestly, that night, that's exactly what I looked like. I had my hair pulled back in a neat bun, wore the standard black slacks and white button-down shirt that screamed, "I'm here to serve you." My hands were clean but calloused from years of hard work, and I carried myself with the quiet dignity that comes from knowing your worth, even when others don't see it. What they didn't know was that I had chosen to be there that night. This wasn't desperation driving me to take whatever job I could find. This was Adana Okoye, and I had my reasons for being in that room. Reasons that would soon turn their perfect evening into a nightmare they'd never forget. The Rosewood Estate was the kind of place that screamed old money and new arrogance. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks from ceilings so high, they seemed to touch heaven itself. The marble floors were polished to mirror perfection, reflecting the designer gowns and tailored tuxedos of guests who probably spent more on their shoes than most people make in a month. Everything sparkled. Everything gleamed and everything whispered the same message: you don't belong here. But I belonged there more than any of them knew. Tamara Bello was the bride-to-be, and she was exactly what you'd expect from someone who had never heard the word no in her entire privileged life. She glided through the room in a dress that probably cost more than a car. Her perfectly straight black hair cascading down her back like silk. Her engagement ring caught the light every time she moved her hand, which she did often, making sure everyone saw the rock that could probably pay off someone's mortgage. She had that laugh, you know, the one. High-pitched and performative, designed to let everyone know she was having the most wonderful time at her own party. From the moment I walked into that kitchen with the other catering staff, I could feel her energy. She wasn't just celebrating her engagement to Emeka Bakari, the tech mogul who'd built his empire from nothing. She was celebrating her victory, her conquest, her proof that she could have whatever she wanted in this world. And part of what she wanted was to make sure everyone knew their place, especially people who looked like me. Emeka Bakari was different, though. I watched him from across the room as I arranged hors on silver platters. He had that quiet confidence that comes from actually earning your success, not inheriting it. His suit was expensive, but understated, and when he smiled, it reached his eyes. But there was something distant about him that night, something distracted. He kept checking his phone, taking calls that pulled him away from his own engagement party. I remember thinking that for a man celebrating the beginning of his forever, he sure seemed like he had somewhere else he'd rather be. The other staff members whispered warnings to me as we worked. "Stay out of Miss Bello's way," they said. "She's already sent 2 servers home crying." They told me about the racist comments, the deliberate humiliation, the way she treated anyone she considered beneath her like they were less than human. They meant well, trying to protect the new girl from what they'd all experienced. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't there to be protected. I was there to see exactly who Tamara Bello really was when she thought no one important was watching. And honey, I was about to find out in the most brutal way possible. The moment that changed everything started so innocently. I was carrying a tray of champagne glasses, weaving through the crowd of guests who barely acknowledged my existence. The music was soft, conversations were flowing, and everyone was lost in their own little bubbles of privilege and pretense. I had served dozens of events like this before, moved through spaces like this with the grace of someone who knew how to be invisible when necessary. But sometimes, even when you're being careful, the universe has other plans. I was approaching Tamara's circle when someone bumped into me from behind. Not hard, just enough to throw off my balance for a split second. The tray tilted, and I watched in slow motion as a single glass of red wine tipped over and splashed across the front of Tamara's pristine white designer dress. The burgundy liquid spread like blood across the silk, staining what I'm sure was a several thousand gown. The entire room seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Laughter died in throats, and all eyes turned to us. I immediately set down the tray and reached for the napkin in my apron, my training kicking in. "I'm so sorry, Miss Bello. Let me help clean that up for you." But the look in her eyes told me that this was about to become something much bigger than a simple accident. "You clumsy, worthless piece of garbage." The words exploded from her mouth like venom. Her face twisted with a rage that was completely disproportionate to what had happened. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? Of course you don't, because someone like you could never afford anything like this in your pathetic little life." I kept my voice calm and professional. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset. This was completely accidental, and I'm sure we can get the stain out if we act quickly." "Accidental?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only cruelty. "Nothing about you people is accidental. You're all the same. Sloppy, careless, and too stupid to do even the simplest job right. This is exactly why I didn't want to hire your kind in the first place." The racial slur that followed hit the room like a physical blow. I felt the collective intake of breath from the guests around us, saw phones being quietly pulled out to record what was happening. But Tamara was too consumed with her own rage to notice. She was feeding off the attention, the power she felt in humiliating me in front of all these people. "You know what you are?" she continued, stepping closer to me, her voice getting louder with each word. "You're nothing. You're less than nothing. You're exactly where you belong. Serving people who are actually worth something, cleaning up messes because that's all you're good for." I stood there letting her words wash over me like rain. Each insult, each cruel assumption about who I was and what I was worth. I felt the heat of embarrassment and anger building in my chest, but I also felt something else. A cold, calculating clarity about exactly who this woman was beneath all the designer clothes and perfect makeup. That's when she crossed the line that changed everything. "Look at me when I'm talking to you!" she screamed. And before I could react, her hand flew across my face with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent ballroom. The slap burned across my cheek like fire, but it was nothing compared to the fire that ignited in my soul. 200 of the city's most powerful people had just watched this woman assault me, humiliate me, and reveal the ugly truth of what she really thought about people who looked like me. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I slowly raised my hand to my stinging cheek, looked directly into Tamara's triumphant eyes, and smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a defeated smile, but the kind of smile that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. "You have absolutely no idea who you just slapped," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. And that's when I reached into my apron and pulled out my phone, ready to make the call that would destroy her perfect little world forever. I watched Tamara's face as I calmly untied my apron and let it fall to the marble floor. The room was still frozen in that moment after the slap, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She was basking in what she thought was her moment of triumph, her ultimate display of power over someone she saw as beneath her. She had no idea that she had just made the biggest mistake of her entitled life. I straightened my shoulders and felt the transformation begin. Gone was the hunched posture of someone trying to blend into the background. Gone was the apologetic tone and downcast eyes. When I spoke again, my voice carried the authority of someone who was used to being listened to, used to being respected. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the crowd that was still staring at us in shock. "Allow me to properly introduce myself." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a business card holder, sterling silver, engraved with my initials. "My name is Adana Okoye, and I'm the CEO and founder of Okoye Entertainment Group." The gasp that went through the room was audible. I saw recognition dawning on faces throughout the crowd. Okoye Entertainment Group wasn't just any company. We owned half the venues in the city, controlled the catering contracts for every major social event, and had partnerships with every luxury brand that mattered to people like these, including the Rosewood estate where we were standing. "That's impossible," Tamara sputtered, but I could see the first flicker of doubt in her eyes. You're just a server. You're nobody. I smiled and pulled out my phone. Not the basic model I'd been carrying as part of my cover, but my real phone. The latest model with the custom case that had my company logo embossed in gold. Tundi, I said, speaking to my head of security as the call connected. Please come to the main ballroom. We have a situation that needs to be addressed. The crowd began to murmur as the pieces started falling into place. These weren't stupid people. They were the city's elite, and they knew power when they saw it. The way I carried myself, the confidence in my voice, the immediate response to my call. This wasn't some elaborate con. This was real. Emeka Bakari pushed through the crowd, his face pale with dawning horror. Adana, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Adana Okoye. But that means... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence as the full implications hit him. That's right, Emeka, I said, meeting his eyes directly. The woman your fiancé just assaulted and humiliated is the same Adana Okoye you've been negotiating with for the past 6 months. The same woman whose signature you need for the merger that would make your company worth $3 billion instead of $1. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Phones were everywhere now, recording every second of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a story about a racist woman attacking a server anymore. This was a story about power, about assumptions, about how quickly everything can change when you realize you've been looking at the world all wrong. Tamara's face had gone from flushed with anger to white with terror. Emeka, you can't possibly believe this, she said, her voice rising with panic. This is some kind of trick, some kind of scam. Look at her. She's dressed like a servant. Because I was working undercover, I said calmly. I do this every quarter at all of my properties. I work alongside my staff to make sure we're maintaining our standards, treating our employees well, and providing the kind of service our clients expect. What I didn't expect was to encounter someone who thinks it's acceptable to assault my employees or anyone else because of the color of their skin. Emeka stepped back from Tamara like she was radioactive. The man who'd built his empire on smart partnerships and careful relationship building knew exactly what this meant. In one moment of rage, his fiancée had destroyed not just a multi-billion-dollar deal, but his reputation, his future, and any respect he might have had in this room. Get away from me, he said to Tamara, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disgust. After what I just witnessed, after what you just revealed about who you really are, I wouldn't marry you if you were the last woman on Earth. And that's when the real reckoning began. 6 months later, I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor, looking out at the city skyline that had become as familiar to me as my own reflection. The mahogany desk in front of me held contracts, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But what I was really thinking about was how much can change in half a year when karma finally comes to collect what's owed. The videos from that night went viral within hours. You couldn't escape them. Every social media platform, every news outlet, every gossip blog had picked up the story of the billionaire CEO who got slapped at an engagement party and then destroyed her attacker's entire life in the span of 10 minutes. But the real story, the one that mattered, wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. Tamara Bello learned what happens when your true character gets exposed to the world. Within a week of that party, every exclusive club she'd ever belonged to had quietly revoked her membership. The charity boards she'd sat on, the social circles she'd dominated, the influencer partnerships that had funded her lifestyle, all gone. Her friends, those fair-weather socialites who'd laughed at her cruel jokes for years, suddenly discovered they were too busy to return her calls. She tried to fight back, of course, hired the best PR firm money could buy, attempted to spin this hate story as a misunderstanding, even claimed I had somehow orchestrated the whole thing. But when you have 200 witnesses and dozens of cell phone videos showing exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching, there's no spinning your way out of that truth. The last I heard, she was working at a mid-tier marketing firm, making a fraction of what she used to spend on handbags. Her social media accounts, once filled with pictures of designer vacations and exclusive events, now sat mostly silent. Karma doesn't always work quickly, but when it does, it's thorough. Emeka, to his credit, reached out to me personally the day after the party. Not about business, though that conversation would come later. He wanted to apologize, to let me know that he'd had no idea about the person he'd been planning to marry. The merger we'd been negotiating, it went through 3 months later, bigger and more profitable than either of us had originally envisioned. Sometimes the best business partnerships are built on mutual respect, and nothing builds respect quite like seeing someone handle themselves with grace under the worst possible circumstances. But the real victory wasn't in the business deal or watching tomorrow's world crumble. It was in the messages I received from my staff, from people who'd been in that ballroom, from strangers who'd seen the videos online. They thanked me for showing them that dignity doesn't depend on your job title, that respect should be given, regardless of the uniform someone wears, and that sometimes the person you think you can treat like dirt might be the one holding all the power. I kept that stained apron, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that treating people with basic human decency shouldn't be conditional on what you think they can do for you. Because here's the thing about karma that most people don't understand. It's not about getting revenge on people who wrong you. It's about the universe having a way of revealing who people really are when they think the cost of their actions will be zero. Tamara thought she could humiliate me because she believed I was powerless to fight back. She was wrong about my power, but more importantly, she was wrong about the kind of person who deserves to be treated with respect. Everyone does. Every single person, regardless of their job, their background, or the color of their skin, deserves basic human dignity. And when you forget that, when you let prejudice and privilege convince you that some people matter less than others, well, sometimes the universe has a way of reminding you that you never really know who you're dealing with. That slap stung for about 10 minutes. Her consequences, those are going to last a lifetime.